Hi guys, I'm so excited that you're here today. Today is day 7 of our video Christmas Advent devotional. We're going to jump right into it. Today's episode is called The God of the Blind. Now, darkness of the world was poignant, and those who needed God were left to themselves, and those who knew God kept to themselves. The fog of darkness and blindness was upon the heart of man in this world. It was there and here that Jesus passed by a man who was born blind. Seeing this, it piqued the curiosity of his disciples, so they asked a very profound question. Whose sin caused this? Was it his parents, or was it his own? This was a great question, and many have asked it. The disciples at this time, well, they just didn't understand who Jesus really was. Like most people, they had heard his words and saw his miracles, but they did not understand. So, we have to remember, as the Gospel of John has told us, that Jesus was the light and life of creation. He was the creator of all things. All things that were created in and through him. And so even the disciples were created by his light and life, just like all of mankind. This meant that the very characteristics of God were placed in creation and in mankind. These are the things that Jesus put into the hearts and minds of mankind so that his will may be carried out in all of his creation. Man's heart was then filled with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness. Man's heart was filled with faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. These things filled all of creation's heart. But sin caused man to unleash on mankind a new kind of rule, and that was that man was going to rule his own heart. Even though God had placed in our hearts the ability to love and care for ourselves and in others in peace and harmony, mankind chose a self-rule and got the opposite result. And that opposite result was the darkness of our hearts. This meant that humans were cutting off their heart from God. And no longer did God inform who they are, what they do, what they say, the way we treat each other. No longer did God inform their identity, but mankind chose to rule over his own heart. Because they did, they not only sinned against themselves and God, but their heart got the opposite things that God intended. Instead of love, they began to hold grudges against each other and people groups to the point of hatred. Instead of joy, they began to suffer and made others suffer as well. Instead of peace, man lived and ruled over each other and even in their own hearts and homes with fear. Instead of patience, man became intolerable. Instead of faithfulness, man became selfish. Instead of being kind, they became detached and self-absorbed. Instead of living gentle towards one another, they dealt with each other harshly. And instead of having self-control, they allowed their passions and wants, their desires, and the things of this world to control them. The heart of man was truly blind, just like that blind beggar that was standing before Jesus. Those who are blind, just like that blind beggar, well, they have no vision. They can't see. And so they become enslaved by the very things that they put their eyes to. They live in darkness. The choice of mankind to rule his own heart emptied out or perverted the very things that God had placed in his heart. Man thought that this would be freeing or lead to a deeper sense of freedom, but it literally had the opposite effect. It made him a slave to the passions and cravings of this world and to his heart, and those things he would try to get at any cost. This was how darkness was spread throughout the land. The absence of God in mankind caused mankind to spread his own will and ways throughout all of God's creation. At the point of Jesus' coming, all of mankind were used to living in that kind of darkness. All of mankind had become blind to the things of God, so blind they didn't even know God was among them. They did not know or understand that the veil of that kind of darkness and that kind of blindness that covered their heart could not be lifted by anything man could do. It could not be lifted through their laws, through their governments, through their politics, not even by their own religions. Only God could remove such a blindness. As Jesus explained this to the disciples, he then touched that blind man that was in front of him, and his eyes were open immediately. Then he turned to all of them standing there and said, I am the light of the world. Now, to show us and to show the disciples how dark the hearts of the people had become, he let that man go and asked his disciples to watch and see what happens. First, as the man that was healed and given sight walked, his neighbors began to question him. And as they questioned him, they began to reject the idea that he was healed, that a miracle had happened. So they turned him over to their leaders. Secondly, the religious leaders of those people began to interrogate this man, and they began to accuse him of a false miracle and tell him that Jesus was a sinner and that they are followers of Moses and the law. They said all of these things to discredit the miracle and to discredit Jesus. But the man didn't take it. He said, if Jesus were not from God, then none of these things that are happening could happen. And he could not be healed of his blindness. But they got upset with him. And they said, you blind beggar who were born in sin, you're going to teach us, the religious leaders? So they grabbed him and they cast him out of the city. Wow. They excommunicated him. That means he lost all his ways to make money, all his ways to meet his family and friends. He was literally left in the darkness again. But this time he could see. Everything was different. So while he was pondering that, and he sat there feeling the weight of being cast out of the city with no hope of returning, Jesus came to him so that that man could know who it's really important to see. Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, that those who do not see may see, and those who think they see may be blind. So what does this have to do with Christmas? Christmas is about how God has given us Jesus, and so that Jesus can shine the light of his life and love into our hearts, so that those who feel blind and lost in the darkness of their hearts may come to the light and be given eyes, so that they become free from the dark city that they've been called out of. God sent Jesus into the darkness to call those living in the darkness to his light, to his life, and his love. And he guarantees us that he will never leave us or forsake us. The good news is that he just asks us to believe that he can do this. Now tune in next time as we see Jesus' friend confront the ultimate darkness, and so does Jesus as well. I'll see you in our next episode. Bye, guys.